I need to tell someone about what happened to me 3 weeks ago in the Cascade Mountains. I'm a pretty normal guy. Work in tech, live in Seattle, spend most of my time indoors staring at code. The most dangerous thing I usually deal with is running out of coffee on a Monday morning. But what I experienced up there, it's changed how I look at the world, how I look at maps and old buildings, and especially how I think about the people who just disappear in the wilderness. This whole thing started because I was going through a rough patch. Bad breakup, work stress, you know the drill. My therapist suggested I try spending some time in nature, clear my head. So I decided to do a solo camping trip. Nothing crazy, just a weekend in the national forest about 2 hours east of the city. I should have checked the weather forecast more carefully, and I definitely should have brought a newer map. The plan was simple enough. Drive to the Pine Ridge trailhead, hike 5 miles to a backcountry campsite I'd found online, spend 2 nights getting my head straight, then hike back out. I'd done day hikes before, but this was my first time camping alone in the wilderness. Saturday morning, I loaded up my Honda with all the REI gear I'd panic bought the week before. New tent, sleeping bag rated for 20 degrees, enough freeze-dried meals to feed a small army. I felt like such a poser walking through the parking lot in my spotless hiking boots. But everyone starts somewhere, right? The drive up was beautiful. October in the Pacific Northwest, with the leaves turning gold and red, mountain air crisp and clean. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could actually breathe. I parked at the trailhead around noon, shouldered my pack, and started up the trail feeling optimistic about my life choices. The first few miles were perfect. Well-marked trail, gentle grade, gorgeous views of the valley below. I passed a family with 2 kids heading back down, and they gave me that friendly hiker wave. The dad called out, "Beautiful day for it." And I actually found myself smiling. That's when I noticed the clouds rolling in from the west. They came fast, massive dark thunderheads that seemed to swallow the sky. The temperature dropped maybe 15 degrees in 20 minutes, and suddenly the wind was whipping through the trees like something angry. I checked my phone. No signal, obviously, but the weather app I downloaded before leaving showed clear skies for the whole weekend. This looked like serious storm weather. I should have turned back. I know that now, but I was already halfway to my planned campsite, and I had this stupid pride thing where I didn't want to admit defeat on my very first solo trip. Plus, storms pass, right? I could wait it out. The first drops hit about 10 minutes later. Big, cold drops that soaked through my supposedly waterproof jacket within seconds. Then it went from sprinkles to downpour so fast, I barely had time to dig my pack, cover out my gear. Within an hour, the trail had turned into a stream. My boots were squelching with every step. Water was running down my neck despite the hood, and I couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction through the rain. This wasn't the peaceful nature experience I'd signed up for. I kept hiking, telling myself it would pass, but when I finally reached my planned campsite, it was completely flooded. There was no way I could pitch a tent there, even if I could manage in the downpour. That's when I remembered the old map in my pack. Before smartphones and GPS, my dad had been big into hiking. When he passed away 5 years ago, I inherited a box of his gear, including this hand-drawn topographic map of the area from the 1990s. I'd thrown it in my pack mostly for sentimental reasons, but now I pulled it out of its waterproof case and tried to make sense of it. My dad had annotated everything in his careful engineer's handwriting: trails, campsites, water sources, elevation markers. And there, maybe half a mile northeast of where I was standing, was a small square marked ranger station. Emergency use okay. I'd never seen any mention of a ranger station in this area on the modern trail websites, but Dad's notes were usually solid. And right now, any kind of shelter was looking pretty good. I took a compass bearing and started bushwhacking through the woods. I tried to rationalize the warnings as I heated up a can of soup on the propane stove. Forest Service personnel probably dealt with all kinds of weird stuff: illegal campers, drug operations, poachers. Maybe this R. Mitchell was just trying to scare off troublemakers. The bit about staying inside and not answering knocks was probably standard safety advice dressed up to sound spooky. But as evening approached and the storm continued to rage outside, I found myself double-checking the door lock and closing all the shutters. Even though it made the cabin feel claustrophobic, the place had battery-powered lanterns, so I didn't have to sit in the dark. I spent the evening reading more of the logbook, trying to piece together the history of the place. From what I could gather, it had been built sometime in the 1980s as a backcountry monitoring station, staffed by rotating Forest Service employees who would stay for weeks at a time. The early entries were all business: wildlife counts, trail maintenance, weather reports. But starting in the late 90s, the tone began to shift. More mentions of unusual activity, reports of hikers going missing, though those entries always ended with notes like located safe at trailhead or found by SAR team. By 2003, the entries were getting genuinely disturbing. May 20th, 2003, camper at Deer Lake reported being followed by someone who moved wrong. Investigation found human tracks that just stopped mid-stride. No explanation. July 4th, 2003, family camping reported hearing their names called from the forest. Voices sounded exactly like relatives back home in Portland. August 15th, 2003, Jenkins didn't return from patrol. Found his radio and day pack scattered along the trail. No sign of struggle. Search called off after 4 days. The entry stopped abruptly after August 2003. There was a gap of several years, then sporadic maintenance notes in different handwriting. Finally, starting in 2019, this R. Mitchell began making regular entries, though his first note made it clear he wasn't actually Forest Service. April 3rd, 2019. Found this place by accident during a day hike. Checked with Forest Service. No record of any ranger station at these coordinates. But here it is, and hikers obviously use it for emergency shelter. Someone should maintain it. Mitchell's entries over the next few years documented his growing unease with the area. He'd started visiting monthly, then weekly, then almost daily toward the end. His final entries from this month were barely coherent. October 1st, 2023, the knocking is getting more sophisticated. Last night it followed a rhythm. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. Like it's trying to learn the pattern of human communication. October 5th, 2023, it called out in my voice yesterday. If I hadn't been looking in the bathroom mirror when it happened, I might have thought I was somehow outside calling to myself. October 7th, 2023. The footprints go in perfect circles now. Always the same size, same depth. Whatever's making them is practicing walking like a human, but it doesn't understand weight distribution. I slammed the logbook shut, my hand shaking. That last detail hit me like a physical blow. I looked toward the front door, really studying it for the first time. The wood around the lock was scratched and gouged, like something had been clawing at it. But the weird thing was some of the marks were on the inside of the door, as if something had been trapped in here and desperate to get out. Or maybe something had been mimicking the behavior of something trapped, not quite understanding how doors worked. I spent the rest of the evening trying to distract myself with my phone, but the battery was dying, and I couldn't concentrate on anything. Every creak of the cabin settling, every shift in the sound of rain on the roof made me jump. Around 11 p.m., exhaustion finally won out over anxiety. I chose the bunk furthest from the door and windows, and lay there listening to the storm rage outside. Despite everything, I eventually drifted off. I woke to the sound of knocking on the front door. 3 deliberate knocks. Pause. 3 more knocks. I lay there in my sleeping bag, heart hammering against my ribs, telling myself I'd imagined it. The storm was still going strong, rain drumming on the metal roof and wind howling through the trees. Could have been a branch hitting the cabin or debris blown against the door. Then it came again. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, clearly intentional. I checked my phone, 2:17 a.m. My first instinct was to call out, Ask who was there. What if it was another hiker caught in the storm? What if someone was hurt, needed help? But Mitchell's warning echoed in my head. Do not answer if you hear knocking, no matter how urgent it sounds. The knocking came a third time, harder now, more insistent. I slipped out of my sleeping bag and crept toward the front of the cabin, trying to keep my footsteps silent on the wooden floor. The main window next to the door was covered by a heavy wooden shutter, but there was a tiny gap where it didn't quite meet the window frame, just enough to peek through if I was careful. I pressed my eye to the gap and tried to see outside. The porch appeared to be empty, but even as I watched, the knocking came again, and I could see the door shaking with each impact. Someone was definitely out there, just outside my field of vision, pounding on the door. Then I heard the voice. Hello? Is anyone in there? I need help. It was a woman's voice, young, genuinely distressed. She sounded hurt, frightened, like she'd been wandering in the storm for hours. Every instinct I had screamed at me to open the door, to help her. But something about the voice felt slightly off. Too clear, maybe, for someone who'd supposedly been struggling through a thunderstorm. Please, I know someone's inside. I can see the light. I'm hurt. The voice was getting more desperate, more pleading. It was heartbreaking, actually, but I kept thinking about Mitchell's warnings, about all those strange entries in the logbook. I pressed closer to the gap in the shutter, trying to see more of the porch. That's when I noticed the footprints in the mud. The porch was covered, but rain was blowing in sideways, creating puddles of water mixed with dirt on the wooden planks. And in those muddy puddles, I could see footprints. But they weren't normal human footprints. They were perfectly circular, like someone had been walking around pressing round objects into the mud. And they went in a circle around the front door, over and over, like someone had been pacing the same path for hours. The voice came again, still female, still distressed. I'm bleeding. Please, I don't want to die out here. But as she spoke, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the window gap. Something pale passing by, but it moved wrong. Too fluid, too quick. Not like an injured person stumbling around in a storm. I backed away from the window, my hands trembling. The voice kept calling out, but now I was noticing other things wrong with it. It never paused to catch its breath. The tone never wavered despite supposedly being hurt and terrified. And underneath the words, I could swear I heard a faint static sound, like a radio not quite tuned to the right frequency. The knocking stopped abruptly. For maybe 10 minutes, there was nothing but the sound of the storm. I stood in the middle of the cabin, barely breathing, waiting. Part of me hoped that whatever it was had given up and moved on. Then the knocking started again. But this time, it was coming from the back of the cabin. The same pattern. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, but now from the rear wall. I crept through the cabin toward the back windows, past the kitchen area, my bare feet silent on the wooden floor. The back shutters were closed like the others, but I found another small gap to peer through. The back of the cabin faced deeper into the forest, and between the dark trees, I could see something pale moving in the shadows. It was roughly human-shaped, but wrong in ways that made my eyes hurt to look at it directly. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that seemed to bend at the wrong angles. It appeared to be studying the back of the cabin, tilting its head from side to side, like a bird examining something interesting. Then it approached the wall and knocked, the same 3-knock pattern. Here's what made my blood turn to ice. I could see this thing clearly now, and its arms weren't moving. It was standing there perfectly still, but somehow the knocking sound was still happening, like the sound was coming from the creature itself, not from any physical action. The voice started up again, but now it was coming from behind the cabin. Help me. I'm lost. I can see your light. Same words, same inflection as before, like a recording being played back. But I could see the thing's mouth area, a pale blur in the darkness, and it wasn't moving. The voice was just emanating from it somehow. I watched in horrified fascination as the shape began to move around the cabin. It didn't walk so much as glide. never seeming to lift whatever it used for feet, just sliding across the ground like it was floating an inch above the surface. And as it moved, the knocking followed it, always from whatever part of the cabin wall it was closest to. It was circling the building. I followed its progress from inside, moving from window to window, peeking through the gaps in the shutters. The creature made a complete circuit of the cabin, knocking at every wall, the voice calling out from each new position. When it reached the front door again, it stopped. The knocking became more frantic, not the measured 3-knock pattern anymore, but a rapid hammering that made the whole cabin shake. The voice was changing too, becoming more desperate, more urgent. Please, they're coming. You have to let me in. They're right behind me. Now it sounded like a completely different person, a man this time, terrified and breathless. But I could see through the front window gap that the pale shape was still standing motionless on the porch, not moving at all. They killed my friends. Oh, God, please open the door. The voice was so convincing, so genuinely terrified, that I actually took a step toward the door before catching myself. This thing was getting better at mimicking human emotion. It was learning, just like Mitchell had written. The pounding continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The voice cycled through different personas. The injured woman, the terrified man, then what sounded like an elderly person claiming to be lost, then a child crying for help. Each voice was perfectly convincing, completely human, except for that subtle wrongness I was starting to recognize. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The hammering ceased mid-knock. The voice cut off mid-sentence. Even the storm seemed to quiet down, though I could still see rain falling past windows. I waited, pressed against the wall near the front door, holding my breath. Minutes passed in absolute silence. I began to wonder if the thing had finally given up and moved on. That's when I heard my own voice calling from outside. Hey, anyone in there? It's me, I'm back. Perfect. It was my exact voice, down in my slight Northwestern accent, and the way I clear my throat before talking. If I'd heard that voice without the context of the last few hours, I would have sworn it was actually me out there. I got separated from my gear in the storm. Can you let me in? I'm freezing out here. But my gear was right here, piled around the wood stove. This thing somehow knew about me, knew details it shouldn't have been able to know. Come on, you know it's me. This is my voice. The thing was right, it was my voice. But I was in here and it was out there and that was impossible. I found myself actually considering opening the door. I mean, what if somehow... No, that was exactly the kind of thinking that got people killed. The voice, my voice, started getting angry. I know you're in there. Why won't you let me in? What's wrong with you? Then, in a tone I'd never heard myself use, cold and threatening. Open this door right now or you'll regret it. That convinced me. Whatever was out there might sound like me, but it definitely wasn't me. I'd never threatened someone like that. The thing was getting frustrated, and its imitation was breaking down. I stayed pressed against the wall until the voice finally stopped, and I couldn't hear anything but rain on the roof. But I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When dawn finally came, I was exhausted but alive. The storm had passed some time before sunrise, leaving everything quiet and dripping. I waited until full daylight before I worked up the courage to look outside. When I opened the front shutters and peered out, the porch was empty, but what I saw in the mud made my stomach clench. Footprints, hundreds of them, not human footprints. Those same perfectly circular impressions I'd glimpsed the night before, but now I could see the full extent of them. They covered the entire porch in overlapping patterns, spirals within spirals, like some obsessive geometric design. And they weren't random. There was a clear progression, starting loose and chaotic near the edge of the porch, then getting tighter and more precise as they approached the door, like something had been practicing how to walk. But here's what really freaked me out. The prints didn't lead anywhere. They just started at the edge of the covered porch and ended at the other edge, as if whatever made them had materialized out of thin air. I gathered my courage and opened the front door, stepping carefully onto the porch. The circular prints were even more disturbing up close. Perfectly round, all exactly the same size and depth, pressed into mud with mechanical precision. No natural variation, no irregularities. It was like a machine had been making them. I followed the prints around the cabin. They were everywhere the thing had been during the night, circling the building in those same obsessive patterns. But there was something else that made my skin crawl. In several places, the circular prints were joined by what looked like normal human footprints. Different sizes, different treads, like multiple people had been walking around the cabin. Except I was pretty sure there had only been one thing out there. I packed my gear as quickly as possible. I wanted to be gone from this place, back to civilization, back to a world that made sense. Before I left, though, I did something I probably should have done sooner. I took pictures. Lots of them. The footprints, the inside of the cabin, the logbook entries. I used my phone to document everything, just in case anyone asked questions later. As I shouldered my pack and prepared to leave, I took one last look at Mitchell's final entry in the logbook. Those words about the thing getting bolder, learning to mimic human behavior more convincingly. I had a horrible feeling that last night had been another learning experience for it, that it had been studying me, figuring out how I sounded, how I behaved, how I thought, and if it really was as adaptable as Mitchell believed. The hike back to my car was the longest 5 miles of my life. Every shadow between the trees seemed to hide something pale and wrong. Every sound made me jump and look over my shoulder. I made record time back to the trailhead, probably because I was jogging half the way. When I reached my car, I sat there for a long time before starting the engine, just trying to process what I'd experienced. Part of me was already rationalizing. Maybe I'd been more exhausted and stressed than I thought. Maybe the storm and isolation had triggered some kind of anxiety-induced hallucination. But those photos on my phone looked pretty real. When I got back to Seattle, I did something I never thought I'd do. I tried to report the incident to the authorities. Monday morning, I called the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest office and tried to explain what had happened, keeping it vague at first. I just said I'd use an emergency shelter during the storm and wanted to report it as required. The woman on the phone was polite, but confused. She asked for the location, and I gave her the GPS coordinates from my phone. There was a long pause, then the sound of typing. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't show any facilities at that location. Are you sure you have the coordinates right?" I double-checked and read them back. More typing, a longer pause. "Sir, I've checked our database, and there's definitely no ranger station or emergency shelter in that area. The closest official facility will be the Pine Ridge Fire Lookout, about 12 miles south of your location." I tried to explain about the cabin, the logbook, the Forest Service sign, but she just kept insisting no such place existed. Finally, she transferred me to a supervisor. "This is District Ranger Cooper," a gruff voice said. "I understand you're asking about a ranger station that doesn't exist." I explained the situation again, and Cooper listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Son," he said finally, "I think I know what you found." He explained that there had indeed been a backcountry ranger station in that area, built in the early 1980s as part of a wilderness monitoring program. It was staffed seasonally by forest rangers who would hike in and spend weeks maintaining trails and conducting wildlife surveys. "But we abandoned it in 2003, Cooper continued. "Two of our rangers went missing from that station, Jim Evans and Robert Mitchell. Father and son, actually. They were doing a routine 2-week rotation, but never made their scheduled radio check-in. The search had been extensive. Helicopters, search dogs, teams of volunteers combing the area for days. They'd found the station empty but undisturbed, coffee still warm on the stove, personal belongings still in the bunks. No signs of struggle or foul play. After that, we made the decision to decommission the station permanently," Cooper said. "Boarded it up, removed all the equipment, let nature take it back. Haven't had anyone stationed in that area since." I asked about the condition I found it in. Clean, stocked, obviously maintained. Cooper was quiet for a long time. That's not possible, he said. Even if squatters were using it, we'd know. We do aerial surveys of the area twice a year for fire prevention. I offered to show him the photos I'd taken, and he agreed to meet me at the district office that afternoon. When I arrived, Cooper was waiting in a small conference room with a laptop and a thick manila folder. I showed him everything. Photos of the cabin interior, the logbook entries, the circular footprints. He studied each image carefully, zooming in on details, his expression growing more troubled. "This handwriting," he said, pointing to the logbook photos. "This is definitely Bob Mitchell's writing. I'd recognize it anywhere." He was meticulous about documentation. He opened the manila folder and spread out some official documents and photographs. Case files from the 2003 disappearance investigation. And there, in the crime scene photos from inside the abandoned ranger station, were the exact same circular prints I'd photographed. "We never could explain these marks," Cooper said. "They were everywhere, floors, walls, even on the ceiling in some places. The investigators thought maybe it was some kind of cult activity, but there was no other evidence of that." He pulled out a magnifying glass and compared my photos to the 20-year-old crime scene images. "These are identical," he said quietly. "Same size, same pattern, same weird precision. After 20 years, they're completely identical." I felt cold all over. "What does that mean?" Cooper stared at the photos for a long time before answering. "It means whatever made these the first time, it's still there." Cooper made some phone calls while I sat there trying to process this information. When he hung up the last call, his face was grim. "I just spoke with Bob Mitchell's brother," he said. "Bob's son, Robert Mitchell Jr. He's been missing for 3 weeks. Went on a solo hiking trip and never came back. His car was found at a different trailhead, about 15 miles from where you were." The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. The recent logbook entries, the warnings written in shaky handwriting. Mitchell tried to maintain a station that officially didn't exist, getting more and more paranoid about something in the woods that was learning to mimic human behavior. "The thing is," Cooper continued, "Bob Jr. wasn't a ranger. He was a software engineer from Seattle. But after his father disappeared, he became obsessed with that area. Spent years hiking up there, trying to figure out what happened. Just like I was doing now." Cooper showed me a missing person flyer with Robert Mitchell Jr.'s photo. He looked like me, same age, same build, same kind of outdoor gear that weekend warriors like us always bought, but barely knew how to use. The search team found his camp about a mile from the old ranger station coordinates. Cooper said. Tent was set up, sleeping bag laid out, but no sign of him. It was like he'd just vanished. I thought about those perfect circular footprints, about the thing that had circled the cabin all night, learning, practicing, getting better at mimicking human behavior, about the voice that had called out in my own voice, knowing details it shouldn't have known. What if, I said slowly, what if it doesn't just mimic voices? What if it can become people somehow? Cooper stared at me. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe Robert Mitchell Jr. isn't missing. Maybe he's still up there, maintaining that cabin, writing in that logbook. But maybe he's not entirely himself anymore." The thought was too horrible to fully process, but it explained so much. Why the cabin was so well maintained despite being officially abandoned. Why the logbook entries showed someone becoming increasingly paranoid and afraid. Why the warnings were so specific and desperate. What if something had taken Robert Mitchell Jr., learned to become him, but hadn't quite gotten it right? What if it was still up there, practicing, getting better at being human? Cooper gathered up all the photos and documents. "I'm going to have to report this," he said. "Reopen the missing persons case. Maybe organize another search." But we both knew they wouldn't find anything. Just like they hadn't found anything in 2003, or when Robert Mitchell Jr. disappeared 3 weeks ago. I drove home in a daze, my mind spinning with questions I didn't want answered. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those circular footprints, about voices that sounded too perfect, about something in the woods that was getting better at pretending to be human. The next morning, I found something that made my blood run cold. There was a missed call on my phone from an unknown number. The voicemail was from someone who sounded exactly like me. Hey, this is going to sound weird, but I think we met at that cabin a few days ago. I wanted to thank you for letting me stay there during the storm. I learned so much from watching you. Maybe we can meet up again sometime. I know where you live now. I've changed my number since then. Changed my locks. I'm thinking about moving to a different city entirely. Because here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. In that voicemail, the person who sounded exactly like me made one small mistake. He said, I learned so much from watching you. Not, I learned so much from talking with you or from meeting you, from watching. And I never let anyone into that cabin. I don't know how to explain what we saw that weekend. I've been camping since I was a kid, done the whole thing. Tents, trails, campfires, freezing nights, raccoons clawing at backpacks. I've had my share of spooky noises in the woods. It's part of the deal, right? But this was different. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the weather. It wasn't our imagination. And the worst part is, nothing ever technically happened to us. Not directly. No one ever screamed. No one chased us. No blood. No missing persons. But the dread, the feeling of being watched, of something watching us the whole time, just out of sight, that hasn't left me. So this happened last October. I was with my girlfriend, Lena. We've been dating about 2 years by then. We both work remote, so we try to unplug every now and then. A 3-day hike through Kenor seemed perfect. Chill weather, great trails, barely any people that time of year. We planned a loose route through the park. Not completely off-grid, but far enough that you could walk a couple hours without seeing anyone. And if you've ever done real camping, not the music festival kind, you know the real charm is finding a quiet spot, setting up your own fire, eating half-burnt Maggi noodles in a tin cup. On the second night, we stumbled on this beautiful clearing. Big open space, flat ground, soft moss, trees around the edges, but enough of a break to see the sky. It felt right. Secluded, peaceful. Just good energy. We pitched our tent, boiled some coffee, and sat around the fire as the sun dipped behind the trees. No network, no distractions. Just the two of us, a crackling fire, and the sound of wind through branches. And then around midnight, we saw it. It started subtle. We were lying back, just watching the stars, when Lena suddenly sat up. She was squinting into the tree line, toward the east side of clearing. I asked what's up, and she just said, "Is that another fire?" I sat up and looked, and yeah, maybe 100 meters through the trees, there was another flickering orange light, low to the ground, not moving. Exactly what a campfire looks like from a distance. It was strange, sure, but not terrifying. Just unexpected. We hadn't seen or heard anyone all day. No hikers, no signs of a trail nearby. But people camp off-path all the time. Maybe someone just arrived late. Still, there was something weird about it. There were no other sounds. No voices, no lanterns, no tents. Just that one flickering light. I waved once. No response. Then Lena called out, "Hey! Anyone there?" Nothing. No movement. No rustling. Not even a reaction. We waited a few minutes. The fire just kept burning. Steady. Eventually we decided, all right, they don't want to chat, cool. We got back into the tent, zipped up, and tried to sleep. But I couldn't shake it. It wasn't dangerous, but it felt off. Like we weren't alone, but not in a good way. We woke up early. Lena said she had dreams all night about walking into the trees and getting lost. I didn't sleep much either. So first thing I did, I walked toward where we saw the other fire. And there was nothing. No ashes, no char marks, no rocks in a circle, no flattened grass, no footprints, no twigs snap underfoot. Just forest. Like nothing had ever been there. Now that got my nerves up. Fires leave traces. Even a half-assed one, lit for an hour, would scorch the ground a little. This was clean, like freshly untouched. I didn't tell Lena how much it bothered me. Just said maybe they packed up early. But she was quiet for most of the morning, like she already knew that was BS. We agreed to stay just one more night, then hike out early the next morning. And that second night, that's when things went from weird to terrifying. We kept the fire going longer than usual. Neither of us wanted to sleep early. Around 11:30 p.m., we started hearing movement, light footsteps, twigs snapping softly. Close, but not too close. Not enough to confirm anything, just enough to make your heart start thumping. We sat frozen, listening. Then, around 12:15, the fire appeared again. This time, closer. Maybe 50 to 60 meters from us, just beyond the reach of our own firelight. Still through the trees, but clearer. And again, no tents, no shadows, no voices. Just a fire. I stood up and called out, firm this time. Hello? Anybody there? Still nothing. Lena grabbed my arm and whispered, something's not right. We should leave. But it was midnight, pitch black, middle of the woods. Leaving would have been more dangerous than staying. So I decided to approach. Just a little. I walked about 10 steps toward the tree line. And I'm not joking. The second I stepped off the mossy clearing and onto the harder soil, the fire disappeared. Not flickered out. Not slowly faded. It blinked out, like someone flipped a switch. I froze. Waited. No sound. No movement. I walked back to the tent and just said, it's gone. We didn't sleep at all that night. We just sat there, waiting, listening, clutching a pocket knife like that would actually help. At first light, we packed everything, faster than we ever had before. We were spooked but trying to act chill about it, you know? Laughing it off. Haha, that was weird. Maybe it was a prank. Some weird campers, whatever. But right before we left the clearing, Lena tapped me on the shoulder and pointed at a tree behind our tent. There were scratches in the bark. A weird symbol, maybe carved with a knife. A rough circle with a single diagonal slash through it. We looked around. It wasn't just one tree. There were at least 5 trees surrounding our site, all with that exact same mark. At shoulder height. Some fresh, some older. It felt targeted, like someone had marked the site ahead of time. Or worse, while we were sleeping. That was it. We left, didn't look back. A week later, back in the city, I decided to check the GPS logs from our hike. Just curiosity. Our tracker had logged the whole route, including the timestamps. Nothing unusual, until I zoomed into the second night. That's when I noticed something I still don't have an explanation for. At around 12:45 a.m., just after the fire vanished, the GPS shows 2 tracks side by side. Ours, and another faint one. The second path looped the clearing. Once. Then again. Then again. It circled our tent exactly 4 times. Slowly, deliberately. And then vanished from the map just after 3:40 a.m. Which, if I remember right, was exactly when our own fire finally burned out. I haven't been camping since. Lena hasn't either. We never figured out who or what was watching us. But sometimes, in that weird moment before you fall asleep, I swear I can still see that flickering light, just out of reach, and I wonder if it ever followed us home. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm not the kind of guy who usually believes in supernatural stuff. Grew up in Seattle, work in tech. Not exactly the outdoorsy type. But last summer, a camping trip with a few friends, just supposed to be a chill getaway. ended so badly. I still can't talk myself out of how real it all felt. It started with a weird neighbor at the campground. By the end, one of us was missing, and nothing made sense. Sometimes I still check my phone at night and see it was all a bad dream, but I know what happened. So, there were 4 of us, me, my girlfriend Amanda, my old friend Chris, and his roommate Jordan. All late 20s, worn out by city life. We'd found this semi-popular campground near a lake in the woods. One of those places you need a permit for, but hardly anyone goes after school starts. Middle of nowhere, perfect getaway. We set up our tents on a Friday afternoon. The lake was glass smooth, sky totally clear. There was only one other tent near us, maybe 100 yards down, close to the tree line. Looked like a solo camper. Scrawny dude, probably late 30s, worn flannel and heavy boots, always looking over his shoulder. Chris tried chatting him up the first evening, just in passing, asking if he needed anything. The guy barely looked at him, just muttered, "No, I'm good, thanks." Super polite, just off, like he was worried he might say the wrong thing. Later, Amanda and I saw him sitting at his fire, back turned to us, shoulders hunched. He looked over once, and I swear his eyes were shaking. I chalked it up to city paranoia or bad mushrooms, but Amanda said he'd creep her out. Nothing else happened that night. We joked about Bigfoot and drank too much. Guess we should have taken things more seriously. It was around 1 a.m. The woods were all missing quiet, only the sound of water lapping on rocks. I woke up to what I thought was shouting, like someone was pissed off, their voice echoing between the trees. Suddenly, clear as day, this guy, our camp neighbor, started yelling full panic, "Don't follow me! Don't follow me!" His voice was cracked, almost childlike, like he was already losing the fight. We jumped out of our tents, expecting to see a bear or something chasing him. But all we heard was him tearing through the brush, crashing branches, stumbling deeper into the dark. For a few minutes it was dead quiet. We couldn't see a thing outside the glow of our flashlights. We heard one last shout, really far away now. "It's not me. Don't follow me." And then silence. Just the wind and water again. Jordan wanted to call someone. Amanda said we should wait until morning. The dude probably just had a breakdown. We left the tent lights on for the rest of the night. By morning, we were all on edge. The little ranger station with cell service was a mile hike away, so Chris and I hiked up there, told them what happened. They checked the registry and radios and just frowned at us. There was no record of a solo camper near us. The only other permit was a family group a mile up the next cove. We got back, freaked out, hiked over to where his campsite was. Nothing. No tent, no fire pit, not even a footprint. The pine needles looked untouched, like nobody had ever been there. That afternoon, clouds rolled in. Whole campsite felt different. Amanda made us double check we locked up all our food and water, even though we always did. Jordan sat facing the woods, quiet. That night, just after midnight, I woke up to sound like someone brushing against the tent. I thought it was an animal until I heard whispering. Soft, right by the mesh. "You followed me." I held my breath, pulled Amanda close. The voice was just above a whisper, but I knew it was a solo guy. Something about it was wrong, like he was both right there and far away at the same time. Chris zipped open his tent, but nothing was there. I think that's when Amanda started to cry. At daylight, we realized Jordan was gone. Sleeping bag ditched, boots left behind, but his favorite flannel missing, and his phone tossed outside in the dirt. No note, no shoe prints, not even a trail where he'd walked. Rangers did a search. Somewhere deeper in the forest, they found a single dirty sock and a scrap of Jordan's flannel, torn off, stuck on a tree branch 8 feet up. No blood, just like a signpost. Nobody ever found him, not even with search dogs. 3 months after we got home, I was at work late, trying to forget it all. My phone buzzed with a text from Jordan's old number. Only one message. You shouldn't have watched me leave. No punctuation. No follow-up. I tried calling. It rang once and went dead. I haven't camped since. Sometimes I still dream about that whisper. Wondering if I'd gone outside and looked him in the face, would I have disappeared too? Be safe out there. Thanks for listening.